Now, here's your host, Christian apologist, Bob Siegel.
And this is Bob Siegel. So, you'd like to believe in God, but you wonder why horrible tragedies such as the Florida school shooting take place. Well, my friend, that has nothing to do with God. God gave human beings free will, and this horrific, insidious action was caused by the free will of an evil man in a society which tries to teach that there's no such thing as evil, and instead, when such heinous actions occur, they get mad at guns instead of the people who fire the guns. Of course, we're all praying for the families of the 17 fatalities. I cannot even imagine what they are going through. Unfortunately, I can imagine politicians exploiting this, and was able to imagine it before the exploitation even began. Thursday morning, I went on Facebook, first expressing my sadness, and then I wrote the following. I have not watched the news in the last few hours. Has somebody found a way to blame President Trump yet? If not, it won't be long. No, it was not long at all. Jimmy Kimmel, that insightful master of wisdom, on his late-night talk show, addressed the audience as if he was speaking to President Trump. And boy, he did blame him. He blamed him for overturning the Obamacare mental health mandate. But then he went on and he said this to President Trump regarding what he needs to do to Congress. Force these allegedly Christian men and women who stuff their pockets from the NRA to do something now, not later, now. And don't you dare let them say it's too soon to be talking about. Oh, good for you, Jimmy. Maybe you should just stick to comedy. That seems to be the only thing you know, although unfortunately, your foolhardy words are not even funny anymore. So once again, it's the fault of the NRA and anyone who protects our Second Amendment. And if you believe in the Second Amendment, you are not truly acting like a Christian. This, according to the man who publicly embraces so many Christian values such as abortion and same-sex marriage. He's really one to be telling us what a true Christian does. Look, when shootings take place, I realize that talk about gun control makes people feel better emotionally. But ladies and gentlemen, that is the only thing it changes: feelings. There were already many laws and procedures on the books that flagged this man. The warnings were ignored. We don't need more laws. We need people to do a better job of enforcing the laws we already have. And supposing they changed the law so that no citizen had legal access to guns anymore, all that would mean is that law-abiding citizens will have less opportunity to protect themselves. Just imagine some would-be assassin saying to himself, now I want to commit mass murder in cold blood, but heck, the kind of weapon I plan to use is against the law. Well, gee whiz, what an unlucky break. I can't go against the law. How wrong it would be for me to find this weapon on the black market. Murder? Sure, that I was prepared to do in a heartbeat. But buying an illegal gun, well, a man has to draw the lines of decency somewhere. I guess the assassination is off. Now, there are still people who would like to hear from God when these things happen, just any word of comfort. Unfortunately, hearing from God is out of style these days, at least from the likes of another celebrity who wants to lecture us about appropriate and inappropriate religious claims. Jimmy wasn't alone this week. We were also treated to the intellect of Joy Behar on ABC's The View. Joy Behar says it's okay to talk to Jesus, but claiming to hear him talk to you is a sign of mental illness. Now, while she was specifically referring to our vice president, Joy's insightful commentary has far deeper implications. It's doubtful that she took the time to consider them. In one thoughtless, irresponsible comment, she accuses most of the New Testament writers who claim to have both heard, seen, and interacted with the resurrected Jesus of being mentally ill. And what does this say of Jesus himself, who promised that his Spirit would come after he left and speak to the apostles? What does it say of Jesus when he said to Peter, "Flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven"? Meanwhile, her words, if applied consistently, do not say much for Old Testament prophets either. Prophets such as Moses, Jeremiah, and virtually every author of the Old Testament, who also claimed to have heard directly from God. As a matter of fact, the very belief in a collection of writing called Scripture is based upon the assumption that God spoke. Thus, one who says it is okay to believe in Jesus or have a little bit of religion is saying it is okay to believe in a God who at the very least spoke in the past. And such a person will have a difficult time explaining why this same God cannot or would not continue to speak. Well, I will not accuse Miss Behar of being mentally ill herself, extending far more grace to her than she is extending to Vice President Pence. I will challenge her to at least activate her brain before activating her mouth. For one thing, the amount of proof that Joy or anybody has which concludes that God does not speak to people is zero. And the notion of a God who creates human beings with an ability to speak, but who does not choose to speak himself, is rather flimsy philosophically. Certainly, God is capable of doing anything we can do. Once we have established that he can talk, there is only one remaining question. What would be his reason for not talking? And when somebody claims that he has, what is the opposing evidence that he hasn't? On to other news. Democrats still insist that Donald Trump colluded with the Russians. Their evidence? Dossiers which they obtained from the Russians. And then there's the Olympics. Gotta love the Olympics. The leftist media, which loves to offer sanctimonious lectures on how women should be respected for their abilities and not admired simply for their looks, are falling all over themselves with adoration for Kim Jong-un's sister. And why? Because she's pretty. And she maintains a peaceful-looking countenance. In their minds, her pleasantness suggests that diplomacy is called for on our part. We should think seriously about extending yet another olive branch. After all, she made the first gesture by attending the Olympics. We should be less concerned about a dictatorship with concentration camps that builds nuclear bombs aimed at the United States, and more concerned about that magic word called peace. Not that the dictator's sister is without her talents and abilities. We would be amiss not to mention her job, Minister of Propaganda, and she's good. Oh, she's good. Look how much propaganda is being disseminated simply by her going to the Olympics and looking pretty in the process. But then our nation should be used to propaganda about men and women. Not long ago, Google fired an employee for writing the following in a memo. At Google, we're regularly told that implicit, unconscious, and explicit biases are holding women back in tech and leadership. Of course, men and women experience bias, tech, and the workplace differently, and we should be cognizant of this, but it's far from the whole story. On average, men and women biologically differ in many ways. Now, at first, Google stood by the guy, even though he got a lot of flack, saying he had a right to his opinion. Then they remembered that today nobody has a right to their opinion. Unfortunately, diversity these days does not mean diversity of opinion. Eventually, he was fired. Now, for myself, and this should sound obvious, I am not of the opinion that women are incapable of leadership or of showing an aptitude in computer tech, but neither was this guy saying as much. He was saying that men and women process their experiences differently. And the issue which caught fire was the audacity to say that men and women differ biologically. What a milestone in American history. You just can't make this stuff up anymore. Somebody was fired for claiming there's a difference between men and women. Are we in the twilight zone? And by the way, this is something everybody believes, and everybody knows deep inside that they believe it, regardless of what they say at the water cooler. Don't try to tell me otherwise. Even the most liberal theory in the world subconsciously admits this. They don't intend to, but they admit it. Take the whole transgender debate. People claim that one can have the body of a man, but in reality be a woman on the inside. Even to make such a claim, one would have to identify the emotional, psychological character traits that they claim are female. Otherwise, their claim goes out the window. Think about this. If there is no difference between a man and a woman, then how would it be possible for a man to know that he is truly a woman? He would be without a reference point to back up his position. Now, if you've never heard this ironic contradiction pointed out before, it's because you live in the culture of political correctness, where nothing makes sense other than climbing on board, leaving your brains at the door, and choosing not to make waves. Well, if you would like to weigh in on any of this, of course, you can reach me through Facebook, Twitter, or questions@bobsiegel.net. That's questions at bobsiegel.net. Regarding my comments about Joy Behar and the phenomenon of God speaking, which I spoke about a few moments ago in my monologue and wrote about this week on Facebook, many people on Facebook liked what I had to say, including Christine, Jim, Patty, Fran, Allison, Rachel, Linda, Nylene, Dan, and many, many, many others. D says, nicely reasoned and well said, Bob. Jesus is, after all, the Word, and all creation was spoken into existence. I pray God uses this in her life to draw her to his Word. Hopefully she will hear from him herself one day. Gary says, Behar is obviously spiritually blind. And then he quotes from Daniel chapter 12. Many shall be purified, made white and refined, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. And then Gary adds, some of us get it. Nancy says, I thought the rule was no one was allowed to say anything negative about a person's religion. Isn't that hate talk? Good grief. Well, Nancy, I believe that's only the rule when people criticize Islam, or more correctly put, that's the rule when people criticize any religion other than Christianity. It's always open season on Christians. See how it works? James says, God talks to us believers as we read his word. We talk to God as we pray to Jesus. Seems to be Joy doesn't own a Holy Bible. Well, actually, James, I think Joy was objecting to anyone who would claim they heard God talk in some context outside reading the Bible, such as hearing an audible voice the way Moses and others did. But frankly, God can still do that. God can do whatever he wants. He does not need to check with us first. He certainly doesn't need to check with Joy Behar. Welcome back to 1170 The Answer. I'm your host, Bob Siegel. I was reading some Facebook responses to my monologue, specifically the part about Joy Behar saying it's okay to talk to God, but there's something kind of wacky if we claim God is talking to us. Teddy says, she seems to have a heart of stone, lost in the desert, lacks wisdom, and perhaps a bit jealous. I pray Jesus speaks to her soon. She listens and obeys. Now that would be an interesting episode of The View. That would be interesting, Teddy. What would also be interesting is for us to all go out ice skating, because on that day, I think hell will have frozen over. But what do I know? People said that about the Apostle Paul, and he gave his life to Christ. Sharon says, another question is, when will Miss Behar take the time to listen? Perhaps if she listened more than spoke, she would find out a whole lot of truth from God. Of course, listening does apply to all of us. That it does, Sharon. Michael says, didn't Paul say in Galatians that he was given the gospel directly by revelation from God and not by talking to any man? So also, didn't Joseph Smith say something very similar? Okay, now Michael has written and talked with me before. Based on those previous conversations, I'm assuming he's pointing out that Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, claims to have heard from God because he knows I do not agree with Mormonism. So he thinks he's created a paradox for me here. Well, Michael, yes, Paul made the claim. And this same Paul also warned that people could be deceived by Satan, who disguises himself as an angel of light and preaches a false gospel, both of which were in operation when Smith claimed to meet an angel named Moroni. And yes, I did just criticize another religion. Mormons are nice people and great allies politically, but their theology claims to be biblical and is not, in fact, biblical. If you're wondering about my own consistency, and as much as I challenge Joy Behar for criticizing religion, you have never heard me claim on this program that we cannot criticize a religion. We can criticize or challenge any truth claim, religious or otherwise. My only points are that those who criticize should know what they are talking about, and that there is a glaring inconsistency when Christianity is the only religion people take aim at, usually for very emotionally, politically correct, unintellectual reasons. Well, my special guest today is Bill Wells. Bill is the mayor of the city of El Cajon. He has worked his way through the political process, starting off as a planning commissioner in 2004, then being elected as a city council member in 2008, and then mayor in 2013. He is also a mental health professional and owns Broadwell Health Corporation. He has a doctorate in psychology, very impressive, and is a registered nurse. His wife, Betty, is also a psychologist and is on the Sharp Grossmont City Board. They have 3 grown children and 4 grandchildren. Bill Wells, welcome to our program.
Hi, Bob. Thanks for having me.
Okay, in a sentence or two, being mayor, an experience you'd want to repeat, or so challenging you'd just as soon give it over to somebody else?
You know, I've got to tell you the truth. It's a lot of fun, and everybody should try it. It's a kick.
Okay, I won't try it. I can think of a million things I'd rather do than run for public office.
It's a lot of work. It takes about 10,000 lunches to get and dinners to get to the point where you could be elected.
I'm sure it is. And now I know there's a lot of issues to talk about as mayor, but one that I wanted to start with is this whole idea of California having recently become a sanctuary state. Of course, we'd already had sanctuary cities in many countries, but California has distinguished itself by calling itself a sanctuary state. So, Bill, we always hear that optimism is a good trait. Unfortunately, with this sanctuary state stuff and other lunacy coming out of Sacramento, I wonder if it might not be wise to take a cue from so many other former Californians and just leave the state. I've seriously thought about that. Now, I'm heartened that we still have mayors such as yourself, and maybe today you can talk me out of my pessimism. How do you see the future of California, and what reasons can you offer conservatives to stay here?
Well, the only thing I can tell you is that, like a lot of us now, I was born in San Diego. I lived my entire life in San Diego. I've tried to live in other states a couple of times, but always came home because this was my home. And my wife and I both agree that we're on the losing side politically right now, but nevertheless, we're committed to stay here and fighting. I think it's a great state. I want to have my family here. I want to stay here till I die. And I'm hoping that most people will stay and fight, because it just doesn't make sense to give up on the state and to run away just because we're losing right now.
Okay. Is there any evidence that we could start winning this fight in the future?
You know, if you look at the statistics, it's going to take a while, perhaps a generation or two, but you know, God can do whatever he wants to do. And there's a lot of hope within the state. There's still a lot of conservative pockets throughout the state. And frankly, most of the state of California is conservative geographically. The problem is that places like San Francisco, Los Angeles, they really drag the entire state into liberalism. So if you travel most of the state, most people you're going to run into are moderate to conservative.
That's true. It seems that these days the tail wags the dog. For example, even if we pass a ballot measure, such as when we passed Proposition 8, then we have some liberal judge just overturning it.
You know, look.
And the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals is the worst at that kind of thing.
You know, I'm not going to lie to you. It looks pretty bad right now with the sanctuary state, I could tell you some stories about the homeless stuff that I've been talking about lately that will make you shocked that California would do such things. And perhaps we'll get into that. I just think certainly if people start leaving the state, we're never going to win this fight. And I think there does come a time when even people who are leaning towards the left, a lot of those times, because of their identity politics and how they identify as being Latino or how they identify as being African-American and feel like they have to vote Democrat. I think at some point, those people wake up and realize, wait a second, I'm not getting anything out of this. I'm living in a slum. I'm burdened with taxes just like anybody else is. And there's perhaps a different way. And so I am hopeful that sometime it will turn around.
Now, are we even going to be able to trust our elections? And my understanding is that driver's licenses are now being given to illegals. And I don't think they're asking you to show a driver's license when you vote anyway. How are we, well, and we could have asked this question about previous elections, but let's just ask it for the next one. How will we know that it was really a legal vote that took place?
You know, there is no way to know. I think we just continue to fight and we continue to push on. You're absolutely right. The Democrats are doing everything they can to keep their majority hold over the state for as long as they possibly can. And as far as they're concerned, for generations after generations after generations. But again, I'm a man of faith, And I don't believe that this is what God has planned for the state. So I'm going to hold out. I'm going to continue to fight. I'm going to pray for a change.
Well, I'll certainly say this. When you look at the federal politics, it does seem that God is doing something. I don't think anybody would have called Donald Trump a born-again Christian or said that he had the character of a Christian. But sometimes God can use a crusty, blunt, abrasive personality. And it seems that Trump is doing just exactly what he set out to do, draining the swamp. For example, this proposal that he's made to give a pathway of citizenship to the so-called dreamers. I don't like that term, but the dreamers, quote unquote. And it seems like the Democrats are showing their true colors because they won't even go along with that. And it seems like they're revealing that they don't really want to show a solution so that they can dangle it as a problem and make it an election issue. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's what I see with the Democrats. For the most part, everything is politics. Everything is an opportunity to try to move the ball forward for their propaganda. I certainly have experienced that lately when I was dealing with the far left on a homeless issue that we dealt with, and they had no interest in talking about it rationally. They just wanted to score points and get on TV.
Now, tell me about the homeless. I haven't been following the issue too much, but I've heard that the laws have made it very difficult to arrest a homeless person now. Is that true? What's going on with the homeless situation in California that's concerning you? And we do have the biggest homeless population in the country, isn't that correct?
Well,
probably because we have the better weather and it's easier to live outside in California.
It's not just the weather; it's also the benefits. I mean, we have a lot more money in food stamps and a lot more money in SSI and more opportunities for them to use hospitals. There's a lot that's been happening out of Sacramento that has really exacerbated the homeless problem. Probably the main thing had to do with what they call realignment. And that was the concept that we needed to bring social justice into the equation and release as many people as we could from prisons, because prisons are another way to persecute minority groups in the eyes of liberals. So they reclassified serious violent crimes, many of them, as now non-serious, non-violent crimes. And just in San Diego County alone, we had about 8,000 people released from prison.
And so they're becoming homeless because they don't have anywhere else to go, basically?
Yes. The law says that wherever you were arrested, you have to be released back into that neighborhood. So about 1,000 of those 8,000 became homeless. That's part of the problem. Another part of the problem is that California has been changing the laws so that it's more permissive and more difficult for cities and municipalities to do anything about homelessness. For example, the courts have said we can't do anything, pass any kind of law that prevents panhandling. And they try to push us to allow people to have tents on the streets, or they want us to, I was the subject of a grand jury last year where they really were pushing me to open up the parks at night for the homeless to sleep in the parks. And they were basically saying, well, parks are sitting empty. Why not let the homeless people sleep in there at night? I said, because the parks aren't for homeless people. The parks are for children. And children want to be able to go to the parks and not see needles and condoms and see people laying on the street, laying on the grass and having sex. And it's a bad idea. And frankly, we do push the envelope a bit in El Cajon. We don't allow any sleeping on the street. We don't allow any tents to be placed. And we do everything we can right up to the limits of the law to prevent people from being homeless in the city. At the same time, we offer a lot of opportunities for people to get off the street.
Okay, we'll be right back. My guest is Mayor Bill Wells. Welcome back to 1170 The Answer. I'm your host, Bob Siegel. My very special guest today is the mayor of the city of El Cajon, Bill Wells. Bill, right before we went to the break, you were talking about the situation with the homeless, how you said they are changing the sentencing for certain kinds of violent crimes, and thus more people are being let out of prison, and we're increasing the homeless. What kinds of violent crimes are they changing the sentencing for?
I don't know all the specifics on the violent crimes they're changing there, but I can tell you that they're changing the definition of crime in general. Here's something you'll find interesting. Right now, well, let me put it to you this way. I had a bunch of 7-Eleven owners in my office recently, just up in arms, because homeless people were coming in and taking whatever they wanted and just walking out, and they would
just flat out stealing it,
just taking it. and they would call the police, and the police wouldn't do anything. So they
kidding.
They came to argue with me about it. So I looked into it a little bit, and what I found was, and you'll be shocked to know this, in California now, because of the change of the laws, you can steal up to $950 without it being more than a misdemeanor, which a misdemeanor means that you're going to get a ticket. So if you go into 7-Eleven and you steal coffee and donuts and bag of chips and whatever you want, and you can walk out, the store owner can't do anything to you. They can call the police officer can come, if they stop.
And he'll just give the guy a ticket.
Well, yeah, and if it's a homeless guy and he doesn't have ID, he'll just say, "What's your name?" The guy say, "Well, my name's John Doe," and John Doe will get a ticket, and the ticket goes in the trash, and that's the end of it.
This is unbelievable. Up to $900 of merchandise they can steal, and all they're going to get is a ticket. In fact, and then nobody's even going to enforce them coming to court to deal with the ticket.
No, in fact, I was talking to a district attorney who said they're having more and more people take cash calculators into the stores with them so they can make sure they go right up to the $150 limit, and they won't go past it. So that's the kind of laws that California's passing. It's really all designed to decriminalize homelessness, to make the laws more permissive and cut the stigma away from homelessness, to normalize homelessness.
Now do they do this? I assume they can do this in any store too. It's not just 7-Eleven, but
sure
But it's happening in 7-Elevens more than the other stores for some reason.
Those are the ones who are complaining to me about it. But I think it's pretty much throughout the state. People are getting the concept that they can do this kind of thing. And it's really the state legislature who, for some reason, believes that they should be protecting not just the homeless people, but the concept of homelessness, that homelessness should be a normal part of society. And those of us that object to it are really the Neanderthals that don't understand how people are just down their luck, and that they're, it's all because of Trump's terrible economic policies that they're homeless.
Blame Donald Trump.
But I can tell you by working, you mentioned that I have a doctorate in psychology, and I spent most of my life working in emergency rooms doing psychiatric evaluations, and I've worked with thousands of homeless people. And I can tell you that most homeless people are homeless because of their addiction to drugs and alcohol. And that's really the issue. Which
they can now buy free up to $900 worth in the stores.
Well, that's been a big part of the realignment is changing the criminality of buying and selling drugs. And of course, many drugs now are legal, which like marijuana.
The ironic thing is I don't really believe that the people in Sacramento are doing this because they care about the plight of the poor homeless. I believe it's nothing but a way of catering to certain voting blocs and special interest groups. Very disingenuous.
Yeah, I think the issue is if you look at any society throughout history, if there's a balance of different philosophies, the state generally stays in somewhat balance. But if there's balance between the two sides. But what happens is when you get one rule of government, a dictatorial type of government, then it's human nature to go off the rails, to take your philosophies to the nth degree and to go way past what is normal and rational and start experimenting with society with these really crazy ideas. And we've seen that with the hard left, and we've seen that with the hard right, whenever you have just one group in power. I think that's what's happening in California right now.
Now, as mayor, maybe it works differently in different cities. Does the police department in El Cajon fall under your jurisdiction as the mayor? This is going to sound like a real radical question, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but
it's okay.
Okay, you take this idea that California is now a sanctuary state. With that in mind, with them just thumbing their nose at the federal government, what basis would they have if El Cajon or any other city said, okay, we are declaring ourselves a sanctuary city from California? And if you as the mayor said, in the city of El Cajon, if somebody goes into a 7-Eleven store and steals, they will be arrested. Certainly there would be no moral basis, but what legal basis would California have to protest that when they're doing the exact same thing to the federal government?
Well, look, we're a society of laws. The rule of law is still what we go by. We have to follow the state laws. We have to follow the federal laws. They supersede our laws, but
the state is not following the federal laws right now.
But it's kind of the two wrongs don't make a right theory. I don't see that the answer is by every city declaring itself an island And
well, perhaps not. And, we certainly don't want to lead to anarchy, but it seems that something radical needs to happen. If not that, I'm wondering what the solution is.
Well, I think the federal government is on the right track by cutting off the financial
funds. Okay, hold that. The tide is slowly turning, or I would say very quickly turning in America, from sanctuary cities to sanctuary states. Here to discuss this and other provocative issues, Mayor Bill Wells. Bill, so you were talking about the hope in the federal government withdrawing funds from the states. Now, doesn't a judge just enter into it again and say it's unconstitutional for the federal government to withhold funds? It just seems like this vicious circle doesn't end.
Look, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals is the most overturned court in the history of the United States. They'll say anything to protect liberalism. I wouldn't be surprised if it went to the Supreme Court, but interestingly enough, California has used this tactic with us quite a few times. Recently, our city became a charter city. And the reason we became a charter city is that we didn't want to have to pay prevailing wages when we built our new police station and our new fire departments and our new animal shelters. The state requires us anytime we do any kind of project like that to pay union wages, even though we don't want to use union. Right. So the way around that was to become a charter city. And right after we did that, the state legislature said, well, there's nothing we can do to prevent you from doing that. But if you do that, we'll not give you any more state money or any federal pass-through money. So they held us hostage. That's all is fair in love and war and politics, I guess. But what's good for California to do to us is probably good for the federal government to do to California. And I think that in the end, California will lose a lot of money as a result of this. And again, it's coming back to that concept of if the liberal ideas eventually make life unlivable for the average people that live in California, at some point people are going to say, wait a second, you won't spend any money on freeways. You're taxing me for my gas. You're taxing me to register my car. You're taxing me on my income when other states are not taxing me on my income. You're taxing me for excise taxes.
Yeah, people are just going to go to Texas, which many of them have, or wherever.
They
Arizona.
may, but somebody might get the bright idea. We don't have to do that. For the first time now, there are about exactly the number of Hispanics living in California as there are Caucasians living in California. Why does the Hispanic group of people have to vote as a block for the Democrats?
Well, especially since, isn't it true that many Hispanics speak out themselves against illegal immigration? That a lot of them came here legally themselves. They want to see people do it the right way.
They do. And I think that if you look at Hispanics as a group, they're generally Christian people. They're generally religious people. They believe in life. They believe in responsibility. They believe in hard work. I can't see many of the values the Hispanic culture holds dear as being compatible or congruent with liberal democratic values. Yeah. I think they're more congruent with the Republican values. Now,
and the Democrats have hoodwinked them. The same with the African American community. The Democrats are the party of slavery, the party of segregation, the party of Jim Crow laws, and yet it's still in the minds of African Americans, I've got to vote Democrat. It's amazing, this absolute lie that they've sold.
Yeah, and I agree. But I was a student of history, and I realized that these kind of lies can be perpetuated for a period of time, but eventually people become wise to that. I think there will be a time when identity politics is seen for the ridiculousness that it is, and people will start voting their best interest. And I'm looking forward to that time because I think that is the right way to do it. I'm not opposed to people choosing whatever side they want to be on, but not because somebody told you. I wouldn't want somebody to say, hey, all brown-haired people must vote this way, because if you'd be a traitor to brown-haired people if you didn't. I would find that repugnant.
Yeah, I would think that we all would. So do you see hope for this sanctuary state nonsense to get reversed sometime, particularly with the federal funds being withheld? Well,
it's so obviously unconstitutional, and there's a federal law. Once it gets to the Supreme Court, I can't see how it won't be overturned.
It's also very inconsistent because the state of California voted for Proposition 8 and changed its constitution. Then when the federal court overturned it, what did we hear the liberal politicians saying? Oh, well, it's not about state rights. We've got to obey the federal government. Now they're doing a complete about face and saying the heck with the federal government when it's convenient to them.
Couldn't agree with you more, Bob.
Okay. Now, as a mayor, we talk about the rule of law and we have to obey the rule of law. Is there anything that could come down from Sacramento that would just violate your conscience so much that you would say, this I cannot do? At what point would you draw that line?
Well, that's a good question. I have never had anybody ask me a question like
well, that's what we're here
the hypothetical of how bad it could be.
He makes a little memo last time I come on this radio show.
Yeah, no, I mean, you know what? A good example would be what happened in Houston, where the mayor of Houston was having a spat over transgender bathrooms with the religious community. And she ordered
them not to preach about it.
And she ordered the pastors not to preach
check their sermons.
And even worse, she wanted copies of all their sermons so that they could go over it. That, I think, civil disobedience was the proper response in that respect. And I think if anybody ever did something similar and I was required to be involved in that, I would be civilly disobedient in that respect. Religious freedom has to be at the top of what American values are about.
Now, let's refresh ourselves. What is the law in California regarding the genderless bathrooms? My understanding, at least, is it's not being implemented everywhere, but hasn't Sacramento come down and ruled that we must provide, that we can't tell people what gender to be assigned to a bathroom?
Not that I.
No, they have not.
I
not even in the schools? I thought that there was something passed somewhere, but you would know better than me.
Well, actually, my jurisdiction doesn't extend to the school, so I don't know what the schools are doing. My understanding is that most institutions that have a good liberal social conscience are doing it on their own. But I just came back from City Hall where we have a male and a female bathroom, and I went to the proper one. So and I was alone there. So I'm glad to say that we haven't capitulated with that at this point.
Okay. Well, we're going to come back for one more segment. It's been an honor today to have the mayor of El Cajon, Bill Wells. We'll be right back. Okay, well, Bill, we are down to our last segment, and we'll probably be right in the middle of something when it's time to go. So I'm going to, at this time, ahead of time, thank you for coming on the show. You're a great guest. Thank you for being such a good sport as I put to you some questions that I think a lot of politicians would have just dodged, but you were just very forthright in your answers. So very much appreciated. California, among other things, on its illustrious list, has legalized marijuana, but I understand there's a little bit of pushback from the city of El Cajon. Why don't you tell us about that?
Well, the new law actually doesn't completely legalize marijuana. It legalizes the ability to have marijuana and to grow marijuana, a certain number of plants that you can grow. And you're allowed to buy it, but you have to buy it from a dispensary. And where it gives us a little bit of room is we as a city are not required to allow dispensaries. So El Cajon does not allow dispensaries. Now, we've had a lot of illegal dispensaries pop up, and there's a place called Weed Maps where you can go and it will tell you where all the illegal pot stores are. And so we've closed down 32 of the illegal pot stores in the past, I'll say 18 months. And we've increased our fines now. So we're fining $5,000 a day for the owner of the building and $5,000 a day for the operator of the building. It's $10,000 a day. And that seems to be putting a pretty big dent in the illegal pot shop.
Okay, so in El Cajon, you can own marijuana, you can grow marijuana, you cannot publicly sell marijuana, correct?
Right. Well, not unless you have a license from the city to do so, and we have.
And your city will not.
We have decided as a city council not to do that.
So there are other cities in California, of course, that will give out this license, but El Cajon will not.
Yes, indeed.
Well, good. Well, I think that's an example of what we were talking about right there. Something coming down from the state, which you said no to.
We do what we can. Look, marijuana is not something that should be taken very lightly. I can tell you from a medical perspective, the marijuana that is being sold now in the marijuana shops and in the medical marijuana shops is 20 times stronger than the kind of marijuana that was around in college when you and I were young. And it is significantly more potent, and it's causing a lot more problems. In fact, there are studies out now that show that 1 in 4 people will become psychotic within a year after using marijuana. And I could tell you that I see in the hospital lots and lots of people who are very, very psychotic as a result of using marijuana. And so it's a pretty serious problem.
So what do you say to the people who try to claim that marijuana does not harm you in any way and that it just helps you concentrate better and focus?
Yeah, it's just pure foolishness and propaganda. I mean, I'm sure there are some people that enjoy marijuana. It doesn't cause them significant problems, but there are a lot of social problems that come along with marijuana use. I mean, in Colorado, we've seen 100% rise in the number of people admitted to hospitals for marijuana psychosis. There's been 145% rise in fatalities on the streets from people getting into fatal car accidents where they have marijuana in their system. People are going to die, and people are going to become psychotic, and people are going to miss work. And there's going to be a lot of problems associated with marijuana. And anybody who thinks that you could pull a lever like this and have no consequence, it's just downright foolish. It's just not the case.
Now, you have a degree in psychology. How does somebody go from a degree in psychology to going into politics? That's very interesting. Tell us a little bit about your biography.
That's something I never really planned on, although I was always politically
Did you have
active.
a practice as a psychologist at one time?
Oh yeah, I've been working in mental health since 1988.
You think you can get some people from Sacramento to come to you for treatment?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. They think they're not psychotic.
I think
but
they're above that.
They're right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. What was the question again?
Just how do you go from being a psychologist to a politician?
Well, it's interesting. I was always interested. I grew up in a pretty non-religious, atheistic, hippie kind of family, and very liberal. And at a very young age, I was disgusted by that whole lifestyle. And I remember being 6 and 7 years old, saying, I'm not going to ever be like that. And so
were your parents into that movement?
My dad died when I was young. He was an alcoholic, and he actually shot himself when I was 8.
Oh my gosh.
And my mom was into that movement, and she always had problems. And I just was really turned off and disgusted by that whole thing. So I rebelled by becoming a conservative Christian.
There you go.
And they're still angry with me to this day because of that. I started writing editorials in high school, and I was always very conservative. I wasn't involved in politics, but I had become a hospital administrator, and part of my role was I hear the music. So Anyway, I started working for the hospital, going to city council meetings in Sacramento, and one thing led to another, and I got more involved.
Well, we're glad that you are where you are. We need more people with you. Thank you so much. Bill Wells, mayor of El Cajon. We'll see you next week.